Alright, so I'm going to respond to a few comments. Remember when I had a million comments to respond to and I couldn't keep up with it? This is much more manageable, and the comments are really good recently as well, so loving it. Also, I realised that, so the last number of videos, I guess you could say like the pointing direction, or the topic, I guess you could say, is pointing to like a really deep and fundamental, or possibly the most deep and fundamental function of separation, or a function of self. And it's the comments that are taking it in that direction, I think. And I realised that, I don't know if it's clear or not, but I feel when talking about it that it's much more natural to be able to point in that way compared to how it was before. Because I tried to point to the most, you could say, fundamental position of separation before, and I had a very strange way of trying to describe it from my own experience, which I'm not sure made sense at all. But I feel like it's clearer now. I feel like it's more like the language is coming to support the pointing a little bit better, which is good. So Mary Rose Mitchell says, so this is the how to become formless video. The cards are somewhat stacked against us and us to have liberation, since the brain stores memories and we get no say in it. From one point of view, this is where I'm going to start talking in contradictory opposites, right? Any position we take here, any point of view that we take on this, and I understand that you have to do that. We're bound to do that in order to communicate our experience and how we feel. So I don't know how much of this, what you're saying, is going to be lost in translation, because I'm only reading the language. This is always framed in a point of view. Any point of view that we take on this is going to be somewhat of a relative point of view. So from a point of view, from the self is always going to say, the self doesn't exist, right? But the self is always going to say, this is stacked against me, this isn't already here, this is impossible, and it's right. It's from that point of view. What's realised as the absolute isn't a thing, isn't possible, is always in the future, is never here, is never already this, is always a something else, an object. And because we can't actually find objects other than imagination, it can't see it. It can't see outside of its limitations from one point of view. From a non-point of view, from the non-position of the absolute, this is already liberation. Liberation doesn't happen. We're already liberated. This is already liberated. I actually, it's weird, I actually find myself more recently talking in a way that represents the radical non-dual message. But I mean, so I'm kind of seeing why people talk the way they do when they're talking about no self, because it's so paradoxical, it's so contradictory to language, to any point of view. So there are very limited ways to talk about it. But since we're talking about it, back to the comments, then we are always comparing this to that, or now to a past event. Yeah, 100%. Triggers and memories happen without consent. Yeah, they happen on their own. It all just happens on its own. You know, to truly see that is to truly let go of control. Let go of the need to control my mind or my circumstances or my life and so on. And that's like a radical movement in this. And it's not something that can be done. It's not something that can be done through the volition of the self, the character. It's more of like a forgetting of that character. And when this forgets the reality of the character, then just what's here becomes obvious. I think that's what you're pointing to as well. I said to myself, my coffee tastes more acidic than it did yesterday. I immediately saw the lunacy of the thought and realised it came from an imagined embedded memory in my brain. When this was realised, I laughed. Another reason is it's hard not to imagine a separate self, because thoughts seem to be personal until it's seen without consent that they are not. Yeah, so noticing to notice a thought, the noticing of the thought again as another thought, and then the interpretation of that thought from a point of view as something that's silly or something that's profound or something that's absurd, again as an interpretation, as another thought. Thoughts reflecting thoughts. But I know what you're saying there, because there's full identification with thought initially, and with that we fully believe the thought. But when we see that the thought doesn't refer to anything other than itself, other than thought, it starts to seem quite absurd, because you see that it doesn't have any grounds in reality. It just appears. Thought appears based on nothing, based on its own interpretation of what it thinks reality is. So then there's a kind of distance from the belief. The belief breaks down a bit, and then suddenly what seemed like something that feels like me referring to something that is actually real, as in the world in my life, suddenly that's not so real anymore. Suddenly the illusion starts to become a little bit absurd, and of course that's another position, but that identity takes a huge hit. Suddenly we start to see that the thoughts are, like I said in the previous video, nothing to do with this. Really nothing to do with this. But there is another, I guess you could say, deeper layer of thought there, and that's the one relating to the thought. So it's clear that the thought doesn't represent the real, you could say. But what is it that's relating to that thought as an actual experience, an actual real thought experience? Not in the content of thought, but the actual experience itself. Like, what's watching that thought? Is there anything there watching that thought? Holding it at a distance and relating to it from the point of view? Or is it just thought? Or is it just all thought? What can we say about the experience of thought? Can we say, I have a thought? Or is it just thought? Just thought. Where are we here? I thought about coffee appears when I'm drinking coffee, so of course it seems really personal. Yeah. So it's a representation of the real, the immediate, an interpretation of what's actually happening. And then you're saying you noticed how it immediately takes that and then uses that to start framing past and future, present and past, comparing, categorizing, labeling, and it does it so automatically. I would just ask, who's noticing that? Who is observing that? And that, again, that might be clear. I'm just going off what you were saying in the comment, which is like probably a lot of this is going to be lost in translation, because it's always going to be, language is always going to be framed from a point of view. But I think I get most of what you're saying. So thanks for the comment. Next one, Christine says, thank you, so helpful and freeing to know that there's nothing to do in the working with emotion video. Yeah, it's just feeling, experiencing directly what's here. It's literally just feeling the emotions, and there's kind of like an undoing. There has to be a stopping of something in order for that to be felt directly. And I guess you could say that there is a kind of there's a kind of inquiry, a kind of doing that happens in order for that to be the undoing to undo itself. But you're right, it just gets very, very simple. I mean, it's more simple than simple. It's more direct than the mind's version of direct. Someone else made a good comment and said something about inquiry, and then basically described their experience of see if I can find, I'm not going to be able to find it now. Yeah, someone described their experience of inquiry and made a distinction between the thought language side of inquiry and the intuitive sense directly of inquiring into experience. And I thought that was a really good point, because inquiry, when I talk about inquiry, it's not about the question. The question points to something, it points to an intention, it points to experience, it points to direct experience. And in that, I guess you could say there is an intention, a curiosity, an openness to open experience up to what is here and intuitively feel directly what is here and what's not here. What is the thought and what isn't. And the questions only, we might initially use the who am I and so on to point our attention, as a tool to point our attention to direct experience. seemingly, or a tool to relax the aperture of attention out, such that we can notice what is here, such that we can notice what the mind is saying about what's here. But the actual, I guess you could say, function of an inquiry is nothing to do with the thoughts, nothing to do with the language, or the actual question verbalized in mind. It's just, I guess you could say it's a way of directing the attention of the mind in a certain way, and then from there it becomes intuitive, it becomes intention based, rather than, it becomes about direct experience rather than the important part of it not being the thought or the actual question. The question's just a tool. So I thought that was a good distinction there. Like I said, the comments are really good recently. So Miriam, by the way, these are handles. I'm not sure if these are actually your names, so forgive me if I'm calling you something that's not right. Emotion, it says on the same video, emotion coupled with exhaustion seems to trigger this like nothing else. Trigger this like nothing else. Then the fight or flight mode of the mind kicks in to fix / resolve / understand, creating a closed loop of identification that feels painfully binding. Thanks sincerely for these powerful pointers. I like that language is really precise. Emotion coupled with exhaustion seems to trigger this. I think this means the mind's attempt to understand the thought. I think that's what you mean. Sorry, I'm tired today, so a wee bit slow. Yeah, so I think you're describing that urgency, that need to do something about it, a need to fix the emotion, that deeply held belief, an energetic belief that something is wrong. I am not complete. I need something to become whole. This isn't already liberation. I need to find something, I need to fix something. Relatively, I'm not saying that relatively that isn't a sensible approach to life. Obviously there is a function of doubt that can be used to solve problems, right? But in terms of direct sensation is what I'm talking about here, and in terms of my personal story about my emotions and what I need to do about them, is what I'm talking about here, and how the mind frames this in a problematic way, and it does it automatically because that's the defense mechanism. It's there to serve a function. It doubts. It tries to protect its perceived position here. It's all based on doubt. It's all based on possibilities. It's all based on learned past events projected into the future. That whole thing is, you mentioned exhaustion. It's exhausting. It's really exhausting. And to let go of that is a huge thing, and it's very frightening for a while, because then there's nothing, this thing that we've been using, this, like you said, closed loop of identification that we've been using to manage all of our perceived life as the one in the centre, we're letting go of that completely. in this. We're seeing that that's not actually there in the way that we thought it was. Of course, that's going to come with some intense experience directly, some fear, because it's essentially a survival mechanism. What it tends to bring up is dread, is fear, all of that is the sensation that we were, I guess you could say, there's no real way to describe this, but the sensation that we were owning as that character, the uncomfortable position of relating to life as the owner of experience in the centre of it. It comes with a burden of having to manage something that's unmanageable, having to try and know something that's unknowable, trying to control something that essentially is completely chaotic. And like I said, to let go of that is a big thing. And I would say the letting go of that is the seeing that it never happened, or it never had to be, or it isn't actually here in the way that it was believed to be. Again, quite paradoxical. And the key in this is what makes it look like that is a very fundamental position. That very fundamental position is a function of mind, a function of thought, but it's so deep and it's been assumed and overlooked for such a long time that at that deep level it's all mushed up with, I use that quite a lot recently, mushed up mushed up with emotions, with the energetic aspect of this. So to untangle that is requires a lot of clarity, and it means that we're going to have to feel what we seem to have been avoiding this whole time, which is what's happening anyway. And it all happens directly, it all happens now, it all happens spontaneously, on its own. And the nature of that is not in time. The nature of that is transient, ephemeral, ever-changing. But the framing of that function from a position, that deep function, is that it holds on to this as if it happens to a centre, to a me, and it happens in an always here, consistent way across time. And you what you've described is there quite well as the mind coming in, the thoughts arranging themselves in a way that just makes it look like that confirms this assumption. And then from that assumption, it always assumes that something's wrong. I have to do something about this. I'm not saying that you don't have to do anything. That there is an inquiry, there's intention, there's clear seeing, there's attentiveness to what is a thought and what is not, what is sensation, and then what is thought masquerading as sensation. And it goes so deep, it goes really deep. And the deepest function of that, I guess you could say, something that I can't really describe and it's something that isn't clear until it drops away in its reality. It can't be clear that way. It can't be understood from a position, because it is that position, the basic level of that position. And it, if I was to describe it in words, it would be a tendency, a very deep tendency to feel like there is something here, that there's something here. And in that suggestion of a something here is also a deeply felt and energetic belief that something, that there's a purpose. Something has to be done or known. That it has a very subtle narrative quality to it. It has a very subtle felt sense of separation to it. I described it as before I described it as a it seemed to be sensation, right? It seemed to be emotion, energetic, at such a deep level where it wasn't clear that what was an interpretation of position, a thought, and what was the actual sensation of what was appearing now. And it was so deeply integrated into sense perception, such that this is how I describe it. I say I'd look around, or say, do you ever smell a smell, or taste a taste, or hear a tune, or see, say, a TV program, something like that has memory associated with it from past, from your life, but that memory isn't the thought, the mental pictures. The memory triggers an emotional resonance. I called it an emotional flavour, an energetic memory type feeling that can be felt. It can be felt in the body, and at that point, it's not so clear that it's in the body. It's everywhere, and it seems like. Let me know if this is mental and you don't understand it. This is my best attempt at describing the kind of no self thing, right? So you feel it, and I noticed that it could be it appeared in response to stimulus. So I would look at anything, and it would give me this emotional flavour, memory, energetic resonance. And I got quite fascinated with it, and I started trying to notice it everywhere. And it wasn't necessarily, the felt thing that I'm referring to isn't necessarily something that you can describe. It's not distinct. You'd have to use lots of words to describe it. It's indescribable, but it wasn't necessarily from a memory from my life or whatever, but I could feel it. And I noticed that it was a framing. It was a very subtle framing. It had a narrative quality to it. It had a suggestion that there is something here with a story that has a purpose, that there's something here that can perceive some sort of inherent quality as a narrative or something like that. That's the best way I can describe it. That assumption that there is something here, that there is a purpose, in any way, I noticed was a thought. It was a framing that was so congealed up with the sensation that it wasn't clear that was an interpretation, that was a position. That's how I would describe it as an experience. It's something, it's suggesting that, subtly suggesting something that's not what's here. It's subtly suggesting a something else, another something. But by suggesting that there is a something here that can be understood, that can be perceived, very subtly by something separate from it. When that drops away in its reality, then what drops away with it is also the belief that there is a spiritual path, that there is something to get, or something to do, or something to fix. That that this whole spiritual thing happens to, or for something, anything separate from what's here. So then it becomes too simple. It becomes impossible to even talk about or convey in words. But in that there's no need to resist anything by trying to get something that's not this. So then really we can directly fully appreciate this as it is, inexclusive of anything that appears, including the thoughts. So there doesn't have to not be the emotion that's here. There doesn't have to not be the thought that's here. There doesn't have to not be the self that's an illusion that's here. None of that matters anymore. And there's a kind of finality to that. And with that finality comes an adjustment period, and a kind of grief. It is a kind of death in a way. For me, it was that I really thought there was something here. I really thought there was something here, that I really felt that there was a purpose, that this is anything. And to realise that is a subtle interpretation, it kind of releases all of the residual accumulated kind of energetic feeling, sensation that illusion has created, and it's because there's nothing there to handle it, there's nothing there that needs to manage it. It's very direct, but it's not overwhelming. It can't be overwhelming, and the conditioning that is here continues after that, and that I guess dismantles itself, but the behaviour patterns and the conditioning that I guess you could say is the result of that deeply held position, that deeply held belief, still rolls on. And I guess that's why inquiry is always useful, but the inquiry kind of does itself, kind of happens on its own. And it's strange because there are a lot of functions of relating, functions of behaviour that are there to distance us from sensation, and like relating with others and so on. And when that's not there anymore, what it also does is it also brings into the focus the aspects of, let's say, behaviour that are kind of dysfunctional, that don't need to be there. And let's say you realise some things about yourself, so to speak, that are uncomfortable, that kind of have to be addressed in some way, and that just goes on. That just goes on. So it's not a finality in the sense of what we considered suffering to be before, what we were avoiding before, that we labelled from the point of view as undesirable or suffering. It's not an escape from that to somewhere else. It's a direct immersion into that, such that that's not a problem anymore, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I've talked for long enough. That'll do for now, and I'll talk to you next time.